All right, welcome back to Web Hacking Pro Tips. I've lost track of the number now, but today I'm very excited to sit down with Tom Hudson, um, perhaps the foremost gentleman out of the UK, coming in at the HackerOne events. Look, Tom, I didn't realize this looking into this. To be honest, I totally forgot to check this out. So this is extremely impressive. Signal 6.82%. So that's like almost perfect. Like you're just away from perfect. The impact 95 percentile 23.79. That's super impressive. What's even more impressive is the reputation. You're coming up on 10,000K rep. So you're currently ranked 40 overall on the HackerOne platform with 224 bugs from looks like 28 programs. That's Tom. I didn't realize these stats when I asked to talk to you. Now I'm slowly starting to worry that I didn't do enough homework when we chatted. But thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Not a problem at all.
Tom, as I mentioned, we can just dive into it. I was going to say when you and I first met, I don't know if you realize this, we were at a HackerOne event, and I remember you sat down beside me and started talking to me, and I was so flustered because I wasn't finding anything at the event, and I was not as engaging as I should have been. And so I wanted to take the opportunity to apologize for that before we jump into the hacking, because you've been very impressive.
We've all been there. I was like that at one of your events. I came to your event, didn't find anything, and felt pretty bad about it.
It's a challenge, right? I remember having that conversation at that event. And I've been on that side, and so being on the side of like the Shopify program and running it, I remember talking to you about that. And for others that are in that similar event or similar situation, going to live events or anywhere, we still saw value out of it from Shopify, right? Like there were some people that came to the event that didn't find any bugs and were kind of demoralized by that. But at the same time, at least for us, we still see value because it means that people are still testing our applications. The areas that their experts are in, they applied those skills, didn't find anything. It means that we're kind of doing something right. It's unfortunate, but it's not really talked a whole lot about with bug bounties. But if no bugs are found, that it's a good thing, right? Like there's always going to be bugs, but at the same time, they might not necessarily be super easy or in the spots that everyone's looking. So it's not a bad thing when that happens.
Yeah, it's like the ideal situation from the target's perspective, really, in a lot of ways, right? Is that no one finds any bugs. I guess it's so unlikely they'd think it's pretty hard to believe, and they would think maybe the hackers didn't do a great job, but I guess in an ideal world that would be the perfect outcome, right?
Yeah, exactly. I've got a lot of questions about the live hacking events. So before I do that, I want to know more about your story. Like you and I have kind of hung out, we've chatted, but never really kind of dug deep. And I think a lot of people would get value from it, especially building off of the video that you did with Stoke. So my first question is kind of the basic question that I kind of ask everybody that comes in and agrees to do this and give away their time is, how did you get started hacking? What was it that got you into it?
So I've told a couple of different versions of this story, and I want to give you the most truthful one. So I got started in hacking in some way, shape or form, kind of at school, I guess. I think probably a lot of people have a similar story where they were messing around with the school computers and, just generally really interested in what was going on, how things worked. And in my case, really quite annoyed with a lot of the restrictions that had been imposed on these Windows PCs through group policy. So like they disabled search and they disabled right click, which was just like, it made the computer just incredibly frustrating to use. Like you couldn't really do a right lot. So I think I hand wrote a reg file that re-enabled regedit. So it set like one registry key, you can make like a .reg file and run it, and it added that one key that made regedit work. And then I used that to kind of go through and re-enable right click and search and all that kind of thing. And at some point, I think I gave that to one person who I thought I trusted, and he gave it to someone else. And maybe a couple of weeks later, I was summoned to my head of year's office. And there was about 20 people stood outside, all kind of looking at me slightly apologetically, and like they just had a real good time off. And I think that really sort of spiraled out of control because my head of year and some of the other staff who weren't particularly technically competent had been told by the IT help desk people that I'd been changing the registry because they had logs, of course they did, and they thought I'd been changing the register, like roll call, and saying I was at school when I wasn't, and all this kind of thing, and changing my attendance record, and I think they kind of treated it as though it was that serious. And by the time they realized that wasn't true, they kind of couldn't back down a little bit. So they were like, "Oh, it's very, very serious. What your son has done." Talking to my mother about it. So I'd always been interested in computers in general and how they work, just as long as ever since I first got access to one, basically. And I kind of did that sort of form of hacking in terms of messing with things, changing things, trying to figure out how they work. I remember just early days of using Windows Explorer, setting custom HTML templates on Explorer Windows so that I could change the text on it and stuff, because that was a weird dialect of HTML. Tried, I think it was try2hack.nl, I think was the site that I had a go at back then. And it was really silly stuff like, view the source, find the password hidden in the JavaScript, that kind of thing. But, it interested me. Ended up working with computers as a software engineer. I've been in a couple of different roles, but I've been a network engineer, software engineer. Spent a while as a DevOps engineer, and some people argue that's not a real job title, but whatever, that's what it was. Spent some time in solutions architecture as well, a bit of time as a lead software engineer, and more recently technical trainer. So I've never really worked professionally in security, but a couple of years ago, the company I worked for, or maybe it's a few years ago now, launched a bug bounty program. And they're relatively enlightened in terms of rules and things like that. So they were like, you know what, if you don't work on the security team, you don't manage the bug bounty program, you can hack on us and we'll pay you. Which, as long as it's not code that you had anything to do with either, you can't, get paid for reports against your own code, which was absolutely brilliant. And I think I was just pretty much instantly hooked. So they announced the bug bounty program. I think it was around midday. And then at about 12:05, I had found something. And something pretty bad as well. I can't tell you what it was, unfortunately. But so I found something because, this is a system I was super familiar with. I've been working with it for maybe 5 years already at that point. So I knew its ins and outs and its nooks and crannies. And yeah, I got a payout, and I kind of thought it was sort of too good to be true, The vast majority of these things where you see it on the internet and it says you can make money, on the internet, and it's not a job. And you're like, yeah, this is a scam. So I did that for a little while, and then unbeknownst to me, I wasn't kind of part of the community. I wasn't following anyone on Twitter. I wasn't on any of the Slack instances or anything like that. I was kind of creeping up the leaderboard, just hacking away on this private program, not paying attention to anything. And then kind of out of the blue, I got an email from HackerOne inviting me to come to Amsterdam. Sadly, that was on the day of my wedding, so I couldn't go. But then, got an invite out to H1 702 2017. Met everyone. I think you were there.
Yeah, that was that's the dark spot in our relationship, Tom. Where especially hearing that you weren't familiar with the community, and one of the first engagements was like, "Yeah, Tom, I'm trying to work.
Yeah,
I'll talk to you later."
Totally get it. No hard feelings at all. I have a bit of a joke with ZLZ about how he posted on the Slack instance saying, "Oh, hey, we're all hacking in Starbucks. Does anyone want to come and join us?" I was like, yeah, I don't know anyone. I've met literally no one, so I'll come down to Starbucks. And I arrived, and they kind of all stood up and said, "Right, we're going." bye. Like, I'm really sorry. I didn't mean to do it at all. But so I always tease him about that.
Yeah, rightfully
But
so.
yeah, I met everyone there. Got myself on a couple of those Slacks and things like that. Started following people on Twitter. Just started to get to know people. And yeah, the rest is history, as they say.
So there's a couple of things that you said that I want to dig into a little bit more. So you kind of talked about like the engineering roles that you took and the technical roles. Where did you learn about like the security vulnerabilities in there? And when you started in on like the bug bounty program, were you going after like, so for me, I had a little bit of a development experience. So I was going after like those authorization and like the coding logic type of vulnerabilities. Like I remember trying to attempt cross-site scripting and even talking about it with Philippe when he did this. One of the best hackers on Facebook, knows GraphQL kind of in and out. And he and I were talking about like cross-site scripting. I remember telling him like, I'm never going to be, an expert in this. I'm not going to go after them. But then there's kind of like this critical tipping point where you learn a new vulnerability type and you kind of become proficient with it and you kind of move on. So I'm curious, what did that journey look like for you? Like, how did you develop like the skill set around security vulnerabilities? And then when you jumped into it, like with the private program, was it iterative? Like, were you going after one bug class and then expanded, or what would that look like for you?
So I think they're probably quite different to a lot of other people because, I was like on the system I knew very well. I was doing a lot of source code analysis and that kind of thing. Okay. I think like most software engineers who've been doing it professionally for a while, I knew about like the OWASP top 10 and how I should be writing secure code and I had to escape my outputs and use stored procedures for SQL queries and all that kind of thing. I knew that on some level.
Right.
But at the same time, I didn't really have a good appreciation for just how bad it could be if I didn't do those things.
Okay.
In terms of like what I started looking for, I was really open-minded about it. So I just went and looked at literally everything I could find and go, like, should this thing be here for a start? Mm-hmm. And if it should be here, like, what does it do and what can I make it do this differently? And if I can make it do something different, is that bad? Like, does that have an impact to the customer, to the business? Because like that's the main thing and always has been from my perspective. I think there was a lot of things I kind of found and maybe didn't know the name for. So like that first bad thing I found, I would call it an SSRF. But at the time I was like, hey, I can make it call an internal API and do some horrible stuff that's really bad. And like, now I have that vocabulary to be able to say, oh, I found an SSRF with LFI mixed in or something like that. Again, like I kind of knew about cross-site scripting because it's, it's always high up the OWASP top 10. But, I didn't think too hard about what the impact of it really was. So, you read up about XSS and it's, oh, you can steal cookies. So, I remember a few times early on, I'd find a cross-site scripting bug and be like, oh man, these cookies have got HTTP only flags. That means like there's no impact, right? And, it actually couldn't be further from the truth. Right. There was something James Kettle, Albino Wax from Portswigger said to me. It was like, why are people so obsessed with cookies? You've bypassed same origin policy. You can just do whatever you want. Like pop an iframe, make it do what you want, change details, do posts, whatever. Anything the user can do, pretty much, save for typing in passwords, an XSS payload can just do there and then. There's no point stealing a session token because it'll be expired by the time you get to it anyway. Just, make your payload do what it needs to do there and then.
I'm glad you mentioned that. That was the same for me when I started. Like I didn't comprehend that idea. It was very much like, yeah, I can run JavaScript, but it wasn't it's in the context of who's ever executing that, right? Like you can perform whatever action they can perform.
Yeah, definitely. I think like as far as other bug types go, I started looking at like some CTFs and doing more reading and that kind of thing. And as I met people at 702 and after that online and at subsequent events, talking to them about the kinds of bugs that they'd found. ZLZ, to his credit, told me about a bug class I'd never even heard of, and then I used that to find one of the bugs that I got at 702. So, like,
don't leave us hanging, Tom. What's the bug?
I'm almost embarrassed to say. So it's a 401 injection, which doesn't even really work anymore. So
yeah, I know he killed that. Yeah,
absolutely. So he managed to, I found an injection point in some CSS, and I set the background image to something that threw a 401 and in Firefox at the time, and not anymore, I'm pretty sure. That throws the prompt. But because of the context it was in, I don't want to say who the target was, but it was a multi-user system with like standard users and administrator users, and you could make it so that a standard user, and it was stored too, so a standard user could like make this prompt pop up for an administrator user in like a believable context as well. So I kind of, in my report, managed to argue, this was for companies, so like an employee could, use this to steal an administrator's credentials probably fairly convincingly, and they paid out on it. Credit to them. I think maybe they were a little bit more lenient because it was a live event, but still really nice nonetheless. So thanks to ZLZ for that. I think one of the other kind of things that really gave me a leg up in terms of like I got started fast. I was on this program I knew well, which was a really big leg up, but also I'd been messing with code for a long time compared to a lot of people. So professionally, I cut my teeth on like writing JavaScript for IE 5.5 and writing like PHP 4 and a little bit of PHP 3 even. So like there's kind of a lot of this old stuff a lot of people don't really know about anymore, right? So like random HTML elements and stuff that aren't used anymore, and all kinds of little tricks from the days before HTML was really standardized that well, and like the messed up stuff you could make browsers do, or sometimes had to do with those old browsers. And that's something I find kind of interesting, is when those old things crop up, like again, like James Kettle's stuff with HTTP pipelining, which is like an old thing, but there's ground for bugs there for sure. So I think that helped me too.
Nice. There was it was a quick sidebar, and this isn't me trying to prompt you for anything, but you mentioned books, like you started reading more to level up your skills. What types of resources did you go after?
So I tend to be quite sort of piecemeal with that sort of thing. Like I'll go and read about one specific thing. It's pretty unusual for me to like pick up a book on a subject and read it cover to cover. I'll usually like cut to the bit that I want to know right now. My method of learning things, generally speaking, is I want to do something. I don't know how. So I am going to brute force my way through everything I need to learn to do that thing, like as directly as possible. I don't often read around a subject that much. And I guess it's kind of almost treating the web and the internet as like an extension of my own memory in a lot of ways. I just kind of, I do know how to do this. I just temporarily don't know.
Right.
And I'm going to use the web to just try and dig out that bit of knowledge that I need to get something done. I do enjoy reading around other things, and they kind of stick with me a little bit. But for the most part, unless I've got a problem to solve, I probably won't learn anything.
Do you have? I try to take the similar approach, and I find my challenge is like I'll read about things and kind of like try to record them. For a long time, like Web Hacking 101 was very much like my ability to start internalizing. So like finding those resources, making a note of them, and then working through that content and like trying to explain it to somebody on the other side of the screen who I'm potentially talking to. And if I can't plain language or explain it, I obviously don't know it. Do you have systems that you employ that you use to, like when you find that piece of information to help you retain it or internalize it? Or is it a matter of like keeping a bookmark and then like tagging properly and going back to things that way? How do you use that?
So actually real similar to you in that way, in that like explaining it to people, and I absolutely agree. If I can't explain to someone, I don't understand it. There's a quote that's attributed to various people. I don't even know who it was. So, if you can't explain it to a 5-year-old, you don't really understand it. And I think maybe 5-year-olds a little bit extreme for some subjects, especially in a limited time frame. But I a little while ago started doing talks and running workshops and things like that a few years ago, or more than a few years ago now. And then a couple of years ago I became a technical trainer, because I just really, really liked not only helping people, but also it really helped solidify my learning too. So, and like, there's like a dopamine or hit associated with learning something new for me, and I like to give that to people. But also it's a real test of whether I properly understand the concept, especially explaining it to a variety of people at different skill levels, because they can ask really, really different questions, and they need different analogies and different ways of explaining things. And you can only ever really explain something in terms of things that someone already understands. And it's really a process of figuring out what those things are and where they overlap with the things that you understand too, right? So I definitely think teaching people is a big part of it. And before becoming a trainer, I used to do this thing in the office, which I think annoyed some people, and other people really liked it. And I ended up calling it spam learning, which is basically where I learned something new and cool that I was excited about, and I would just go and tell everyone. Like, I just learned this really cool thing. I'm going to tell you about it. And like, no, I really, no, I'm going to tell you about it right now because it's on my mind. I'm super excited about this new piece of information that I found. Just blown my mind. I think some people really like that, and we would end up having conversations about things, and occasionally end up researching a topic with another person, just impromptu, like, oh, what's this other bit mean? Or we'll Google for it right now. Let's have a look. No time to waste. And I think I never really was able to help myself with that. It's not something I did deliberately. It's just something that kind of happened. But in hindsight, I think that really helped to solidify things, was trying to rephrase stuff, put it in my own words. And I always have this mental image of there's a pattern of neurons firing in my brain, and I want to make that same or equivalent pattern of neurons fire in someone else's brain too. And how can I most effectively do that?
So when you do that, for the people that are watching or potentially listening to this, is it a matter of you finding a topic and then finding a place to present that, or how does that end up occurring? Is it say work is introducing new technology, or you have to learn something new for work, so then you go out, you do that, and then you realize you kind of want to go share that knowledge? Or is it you identifying something new you want to learn, doing that, and then this is the method that you employ to solidify that? Where does the presentation and the training aspect fit into the broader spectrum of your learning? Is it at the beginning? Is it at the end, middle?
I think it's quite continuous, but in different forms. So generally speaking, I will refuse to do a talk on a subject I don't know well, because, and I have this, I guess, a litmus test of whether I should do a talk on the subject or not, which is, am I ready to have an in-depth impromptu conversation about this topic? And if the answer is no, I shouldn't do a talk on it, at least not yet, and I definitely shouldn't run a workshop on it. Because I need to be prepared to answer any questions that might come up, and have at least some kind of answer to most of them. And questions are one of my favorite things, because they give me more problems, which is learning opportunities, right? So early on in kind of the process of learning something, and whether that's work have said, we're going to use this new technology, you need to go and research it, or whether I just saw a tweet that had a word in it that I didn't know, and I Googled it and read about it on Wikipedia, and then just went into a Wikipedia hole and had 20 tabs open, like cross-referencing everything and trying to figure things out. Sorry. Oh, excuse me. Like the information originates from different sources. And then, like, if it's something that catches my interest, I'll just try and read about it, everything I can about it. And like, I genuinely spend a lot of time on Wikipedia, sometimes going down completely irrelevant rabbit holes, and finding myself reading about the minutiae of a topic that I didn't know about the day before. And sometimes that turns into a workshop that I'll run at work if it's relevant, like if it's something to do with a programming language or a particular technology, or just something that's relevant to the business. Sometimes it will result in doing a talk, either at like a medium-sized conference. I've never really done a really big conference. I've done a couple of talks at a local B-Sides, which is like a few hundred people. They're on YouTube, shameless plug.
Thanks, I'm gonna check them out.
What else? I've done quite a few talks at my local DC meetup, DC 151. I think I did like every week for like the first 3 or every session for like the first 3 or 4 months they were running, because it was like, we need a speaker. And I have this reputation of being able to, if you forgive the expression, pull a talk out of my ass. Like the day before or the same day. And sometimes I've done talks with like no slides. I'm going to show you this tool, or I'm going to write this tool live in front of you all, which is a little bit scary sometimes. But and then other times it's kind of developed into like a series of workshops even. So and at work, I run like series of workshops on coding for beginners, which is what I'm a real fan of, because I really like that, seeing people get really excited about writing their first code. And it's just like simple text-based games that we write in Ruby, but like that's way more satisfying than getting some senior developer just like slightly more skilled than they were before, if that makes sense.
Right. Yeah, no, it definitely does. There's a fork in the road in terms of what I want to ask you, because I have burning questions, and then you also raised a number of things that I want to ask about even more. So what I'm going to table right now is the open source and the tooling development, because I really want to know about that. But I'm also, one of the reasons why I really wanted to talk to you is because this has been top of mind for me for a while, is like the burnout and the break. And so you were pretty public about taking about 8 months off. Was that right? It was about 8 months, right, from hacking. So I'm curious, if you don't mind, if we can kind of dive into that and the mental aspect of that side of it, because as you mentioned, I didn't really appreciate it, but you got into hacking outside of the community, got into the community, and then ended up taking an extensive break. I guess extensive in like relative terms to bug bounties. So can we dive into it? Like, what prompted that break?
Absolutely. So it was a number of things. So I'd been working really hard. I became a technical trainer, like I think it was about 18 months, 2 years ago, and love it, highly passionate about it. But I'm also an introvert, and I love people and helping people and spending time with people. But when I do, I need a break afterwards. And I think that's a relatively common thing in the tech world in general. But I didn't take enough time off. Here in the UK, I get like 30 days vacation a year, which like I think sounds a lot to the Americans, and it makes me really worry actually about people who are only getting 10. But so I didn't take enough time off for me. When I did have time off, I was doing like decorating the house or like some other task. It was still work, right? Or going to an event as well. So like Montreal for the Shopify event, which is, it's amazing. It's great fun. It's an incredible experience, but it's not a break. It's not time off. It still uses energy instead of replenishes energy. So That was kind of one aspect of it. And then alongside that, we had some family health issues. I don't want to go into too much detail, but there was this period where my wife and I were in hospital literally every weekend for a month. And not for the same reasons either. So one time it was my wife, one time it was one of my kids, one time it was another one of the kids, another time it was one of the other kids again, with like different issues. And like one of them had like what looked like a bite that got like an insect bite or something that got infected. And you know, you have kids, you'll understand it's terrifying, right?
Yeah.
Completely draining. And I was trying to be strong and supportive, because I was kind of like, there was nothing wrong with me for the most part, at least not in any kind of acute way. So, I was trying to be supportive, but still going to work as well, because, I was running long blocks of training for our graduate program, and I couldn't really not do that from my perspective. Because I'd be letting a lot of people down, so I was still doing that, and it just got more and more and more. And then sometime around January was the point that I really noticed. So I think it was probably around October time last year that I probably was burnt out, and then around January, I had a panic attack, which was a new experience for me. There wasn't really anything in particular that triggered it. I was just at work, and then just had this feeling that I needed to be outside. I felt kind of dizzy and a little bit nauseous, and like breathing heavily. I'm like, not a fun experience at all. And I think I just kind of completely eroded away. So, I went to see my doctor. And I had a good cry. I'm not ashamed to say. No shame in crying, especially in that situation. And my doctor, bless him, he told me, he said, "I think you are very strong. You are a hero," which made me, made me even more tearful. But he prescribed me antibiotics. Not antibiotics, antidepressants. He just prescribed me antidepressants. And, I think they've leveled me out a lot. I still, I think I was around sort of March time or so. I was first prescribed them. And then maybe a few months later, I started doing a little bit of coding, again, and that sort of thing. And it's funny, you can see the hole in my GitHub profile, in the all the green dots on the grid. There's just like this big gap where not really very much happened. And I'm not fully back as who I was. I think it takes a really, really long time to recover from these sorts of things. I still have bad days where I just don't want to do anything. I just want to sit and watch YouTube videos, which is a big pastime of mine. That still happens. I guess if I was at 100% 2 years ago, and I was at 0% the day I had the panic attack, then I guess I'm maybe 50-60% right now. I watched a part of a talk I did a couple of years ago, one of the ones at B-Sides on YouTube, and I was like, wow, who's this like happy, chirpy guy? I could really see it in myself. So not quite there yet, but I think it just needs more time.
That's Tom. I'm going to speak on behalf of everybody's listening, and I'm going to say thank you. Really appreciate it. I did not anticipate that being the answer. So I really appreciate you kind of extending the vulnerability out there and talking about that. This is not easy. So when I've been thinking about stuff, I haven't gotten to that point. But it's changed for me more so. Just feeling the pressure of having to find vulnerabilities, having to be performing and wanting to be invited to, events and continue to find bugs, and just this idea that, you've got a little bit of success, so everything kind of comes easy. And I don't think he'd mind me talking about it, but Franz and I have had those conversations too, where, you know, sometimes the excitement just comes from finding the bugs themselves, because it's reiterating like, hey, I can still do this. Like, money aside, like the most enjoyment is from finding something and submitting that report. And he and I have talked about like the imposter syndrome, and I know you've talked about that as well, like going to these events. And one of the things I really struggle with, and so I've just taken a step back from it. Like one of the best things I did was removing Twitter from my phone, and not engaging, because all you see is this positive, like, I hate them. I'll be explicit. Like I always try to talk about them. I hate the tweets that are, I just made X amount, or I just got paid this amount. I understand the value in people saying like, yeah, I want to celebrate with people, but once you get into the community and you're kind of like really deep into it, and all you see is like tweets or like people talking about, I just made this amount, and you happen to be going through a rough patch or something like that, it's really tough mentally. And that's where I've struggled the most. And so for me, it's just like, I've just gotten off of social media. I removed Twitter from my phone, and at the first point, it was like I didn't know what to do with myself, and I stopped looking, stopped getting notifications, everything like that. And then I thought, after reading a couple books by Cal Newport on like disengaging from that stuff, I thought, maybe I'll check it once a day or twice a day type of thing. And all of a sudden, like, I would go the entire week without checking in and going in. And at the beginning, the anxiety was through the roof. Like I didn't know what to do with myself. Like I'd be bouncing around on different like apps, trying to check things, like not having social media or even like news sites and stuff like that. And the anxiety, like it definitely was not good for the family. And then after that week, it just kind of like leveled out. It was a lot better. And so I know when you were tweeting about it, you were talking about it, I got really interested, because I've been struggling back and forth. And like I said, not to the same extent that you have. It almost like you don't want to compare, right? But I wonder, I don't know. I feel like my issues are very much pale in comparison to like actual real issues.
You should never do that, because otherwise,
I know.
Like one person in the world who can complain, right? Which is ridiculous. Everything's relative. Yeah,
exactly. No, you're right. And so anyways, you sharing that, it's great, because I don't think those types of conversations exist enough. And I mean, I'll be blunt, I don't think the platforms kind of consider that, because they're very much focused on like, let's get the most people making the most money, because that's the biggest driver. And I don't think that is the biggest driver, right? In a knowledge-based economy, it's autonomy, leadership, ability to kind of do what you want to do and own what you're doing.
I think there's kind of a question of scale there as well, right? So like when whoever it was at HackerOne, Uppercard, or whatever wrote the code that tweets that stuff and has that as the template, they were real small, tiny, and those tweets came out once a week, right?
Yeah, that's fair.
And now things have changed. It's really different, and the value, like the amounts, were much lower back then as well. Like most programs topped out at 2K, and people getting like 10 or 20 was completely unheard of. So I think there's definitely an element of that. And I am kind of torn on them, because like you say, on the one hand, I get that people want to celebrate, but at the same time, like, it's not adding a great deal of value.
What my like, so when I've talked about it, and I want to clarify, like I get that it's coming from a positive perspective, and that kind of happens, right? Like with all new technologies, it's kind of like you roll it out, and then you don't really understand like the impact, like prolonged impact, until well after. My feedback when it's been solicited has been like, don't take away the celebration aspect. If you want to keep the dollars, but put them in context, right? Nobody can add the context of like, it took me 10 hours to find this particular vulnerability. Although, I mean, arguably Tommy, Doggy G, does a very good job of that, because he's transparent and will answer any question that you ask him. But even just to change it to be like, hey, I just made $1,000 for finding a stored cross-site scripting vulnerability, or I just found, just kind of quantifying the idea so that it's not just someone being inundated with this idea of success, like the quote unquote Facebook effect of everyone's happy but me, right? Like, and they're happy all the time. It's everybody's not making thousands of dollars all the time. They're putting in, potentially 5, 10, 15, 20 hours into a vulnerability.
Yeah. Like the expression I read a while ago that really stuck with me was, don't compare your life to people's highlight reels.
Yeah.
And like on social media, especially, that's what it is people's highlight reels. And I've actually, when people have privately said to me in the past, or mentioned in a semi-private forum, that they're having a bad patch and they're not finding any bugs, like, you should tweet that. Like, I got Nafi to tweet that a little while ago. I don't know if you saw it with not checking Twitter that often. To say like he'd not found a bug in a month or something like that, because people really need to see this, because people like Nafi especially, like, when he's doing well, he's doing really well. And I really appreciate seeing that. And I think it's hard to do, to convince yourself to go, I just spent 8 hours looking for a DOM XSS and I didn't find it. $0 for me.
I'm just thinking, I mean, you're kind of bang on, and it is good. I've seen Nafi do it a few times, and he's another one who's pretty transparent, right? Like, you can ask him questions on Twitter and he'll respond, and he'll be explicit. I don't, sorry?
Brutally honest, I think, would be the best way to describe Nafi.
Yeah, he's a character. So I don't want to dismiss it, but I'm also conscious of our time, and potentially I could be kicked out of this room in 12 minutes. So I want to talk about a more cheery event, or rather topic, and the live hacking events themselves. So you've been to more than a few. You've won a belt at one. So what's it like to go into those events? What's it like to take home the belt? I'll turn it over to you on those two questions.
Okay. The events are amazing. Like, I think, I don't want this to sound conceited, but as a trainer, I'm used to, I don't want to use the term smartest person in the room, but on the subject that I'm teaching, I'm the most experienced on that. And that's my day-to-day. Mm-hmm. So to be in a room where that is so not the case, and there's so many smart people to learn from, is really, really great. It's a great contrast. And I try and pick people's brains as much as I can whenever they mention something I don't know about. Like,
what does that look like? I want to stop it. I want to interject there for that specific reason, because, like, what does that look like? What do those conversations look like? Like, what is it that you're hearing, and how do you how do you interject without that feeling of somebody thinking like, hey, this is my livelihood?
I might come off a little bit mean now. I hadn't really thought about it that much in those terms. I think I'm aware that I'm more open than most people, in terms of knowledge and tools and that sort of thing. But usually I'll just either be talking to someone, say, have you got any bugs for the event? And then they might say, oh yeah, I've got an SSRF or whatever. I'm like, oh right. Like, can you tell me vaguely where it was? Was there any tricks to it or anything? And, a lot of people say, I'd really rather not, or they'll say, maybe after the event or after the dupe window closes, if they're, being a little bit suspicious, but which is fine. Like, but then also a remarkable amount of people are really open to sharing, and they'll say, I can't give you specifics, but there was, this really cool part where I used this as a bypass for the WAF or whatever, and a lot of people are really willing to share that stuff. I haven't really had like any bad reactions to those questions. Mm-hmm. So yeah, the honest answer there is I just ask. Or oftentimes you'll just be in a conversation with people and they'll voluntarily share as well, and be like, oh man, I found this really cool XXE or whatever it is, and then you can get some details out of them. So yeah, I think that's what that looks like for me.
Yeah, I mean, from my experience, like that's kind of what those events are all about. That's one of the main reasons why I enjoy them because I find them hugely stressful. Like having to go and perform.
Mm.
And so that's one of the things that I really enjoy. And obviously, Ted did a great job kind of starting off this trend of like the show and tells that happen at all those events. And it wasn't meant to, the question wasn't meant to put you on the spot. It was more so like if somebody's there for the first time, like it's all so overwhelming. Like what do those conversations look like with other people? And to your point, a lot of people are open and forthcoming, right? Like I mean, we all know about the vulnerabilities that are out there. You know, maybe there's a handful that, or a topic here or there that somebody specific might know that you might not know, and so they're keeping those cards close to their chest. Um, but at the same time, like we're all there for the same reason. I take the approach of the more hackers that are there, the more that this is legitimized, and the more companies that are going to be coming onto these platforms, more opportunity that there's going to be. Right, like it's crazy to fathom how many companies operating out there and on the internet, and not only how many companies, but how many assets they have to secure, and how often those change each day. Um, so that's kind of been my approach, and I've had the same experience as you with people being very forthcoming and having conversations. So yeah, no, it's that's great to hear. The one thing I did want to highlight too is it's not all a take scenario. Like you mentioned it, we haven't talked about it. Maybe we should transition into it now. But you have a lot of open source tools. You're a pretty open book yourself. So the stuff that you create, for the most part, is open on your GitHub account, right?
Yeah, and not even for the most part. I realized a couple of months back, literally everything.
Yeah.
So, like, if I code something, it goes on GitHub, pretty much, outside of work, for the record,
Right.
in case my company's lawyers are watching. Anything I create outside of work, pretty much, because part of the reason is, I use quite a few different computers around the place. I've got a laptop and a desktop, and like got a work laptop and that sort of thing. And so I want stuff to be easily accessible. And one of the easy ways to do that is to just have it out in the open. And I guess I used to be embarrassed to put things online, like if they weren't finished, or maybe the code was really hacky or something like that.
Yeah, I was going to ask that. Yep.
And I don't really know when that feeling went away. It's kind of hard to pinpoint, but that was part of the original reason. It was just like a practicalities thing. It's like you didn't used to get free private repos on GitHub. I wanted everything in version control because I think you've only got to lose one bit of important source code once before you decide everything's going in Git or SVN or whatever you want to use. So I was like, yeah, okay, it's going on GitHub. And one of the ideas that I hit upon was this idea of a hacks repo. So it's actually one of my most popular repositories now, which is kind of crazy to me because that was like my place for experiments and like really alpha quality tools I just hacked together because I needed them right there and then. Or occasionally like someone would ask me for help with something and I was like, I don't have something that can do that for you, but I can write something real quick in, like 20 minutes, half an hour or something, and just put it online for you. And I've actually done that quite a few times now, including at the last 702. A couple of researchers, it was Arnie actually, approached me and said, do you have a tool that does this thing? And I said, no, but let's go and write one because that sounds like fun. And, it just kind of spiraled out of there of sort of saying, like people asked for help or like just in general, and I would respond and say, oh, hey, I've got this tool that does that I wrote for me, and you're welcome to use it. And, like sometimes they shared them as well with other people and kind of gradually I've just built more and more things. And I see no reason for them to be private either because like I think there's a big misconception in the bug bounty world with the less experienced people, which is like the tools are really, really important in terms of like, you can't find things without them, or it's the tools that make you find things. And really, the reality couldn't be further from the truth. Two people using the same tool will find different things like as evidenced by, like Burp Suite. Everyone uses it. Everyone uses different things. So the fact that I give my tools away is not like, even if I did have some kind of secret sauce, like the tools wouldn't be it. They do enable some really cool things. And that's kind of my primary motivation for writing a tool, is like with learning stuff. It's sort of, I have this problem, or something that's tedious, or I have an idea I want to try. What do I need to accomplish that? And usually it's, what's the minimum do I need to accomplish that? And that kind of makes for tools that are fairly generic and reusable. And if you know how to combine them, you can do some really cool stuff.
How is that? So for me, I know like internally, like when I've thought about it, self-reflected, one of the things I struggle with is like developing a tool. It's like scope creep. Like I started off with it wanting to do this, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, why don't I do this? Why don't I do this? Why don't I do this? To the point where it's like, I'm never going to finish this. Like I just abandon it. How do you stop that from yourself? Like how do you approach the tool building?
I think the main thing there is having a way to combine tools.
Okay.
Is a big part of that for me. So if you've seen the video I did with Stock that you mentioned, that was kind of the first time I like publicly showed off like a lot of my recon methodology and how I do things. And it wasn't a secret. It's just no one had really asked before that, or at least not many people. And that's, as far as I was concerned, a relatively standard way to work in a Linux or a Unix environment. Is you use pipes to combine things together, and you use loops and bash to stick stuff together. And like all of the old school Unix tools are kind of set out to work well that way. So there's this idea of the Unix philosophy of write small tools that do one thing and do it well, output and consume text streams, because they're the universal interface. And like there's different variations on the Unix philosophy, but they're the key things for me. So the fact that I write my tools to usually consume text on standard in and just output lines of text to standard out means I can stitch them together with pipes. And that means I can focus on solving one specific problem, and just that problem. And if there's another problem that needs solving somewhere, I can do that in a different tool. And I think that's actually really important for me, because I used to attempt the big projects. Like, I'm going to write the world's best bug bounty scanner, and it's going to do all these. I never finish that stuff. Never do it. If I can't get a proof of concept in an hour or two, I'm pretty unlikely to do it. And I think that's, maybe you could consider that a flaw in me, but I've worked around that flaw by changing how I approach things instead of trying to fix the flaw, if that makes sense. And
Yeah,
it's
no,
okay.
100%. That's awesome. Like I've heard the Unix philosophy as well, particularly like the small tools to do something really well. And it's totally unrelated, but I've been looking at like VR game development. And so I really want to create a VR game. But it's like the whole world is massive, right? Like you can do kind of whatever you want to do. And so I'm just trying to stick with like the most minimal viable product. And what it occurred to me last night was I was, again, working late trying to reiterate through this. And I want it to be one where you can you have to move around within like your 5x5 space. But at the same time, I don't want the world to feel confined to 5x5, right? And so what you can do in VR is like just block everything off. So you have this massive kind of environment behind, but there might be an object obstructing you. And so anyways, I bring it up because it really hammered home last night, where I was like, no, my wall, my playing space can be tiny, but then I just got to create this massive wall and like world around it. And it's the idea of like, you just got to focus in on that one particular thing that you're building and not try to build like, texture every single block on the wall or brick on the wall. More so, you just got to get everything down there, get the product, and then worry about the rest of it later. So it's interesting to hear you talk about that and your approach to tools. There's projects I want to go back to and start just breaking apart to do that same type of idea, have them kind of text-based, standard in, standard out. I think that's an awesome approach. It's been about an hour, Tom. I'm very conscious of your time. So there's a few questions I love to ask people. one of which is kind of like, where do you go to like learn new things about hacking? And then B, based on that, do you have any advice that's for new hackers, people that are starting out right now?
So where I go to learn new things is like a lot of it's organic. Like I don't necessarily always seek it. It kind of finds me. And a lot of that's on Twitter. I do know like what you mean about it can, you know, take over your life, and you've got to be careful with that sort of thing. And like I don't get involved in arguments or anything, but like a lot of people tweet really cool stuff, right?
Yeah.
Like if they've got if they're doing a stream, or they've done a video on YouTube, or they've written a blog post or whatever, people tweet about it. Like it's one of people's main mechanisms for getting stuff out there. So like a lot of the stuff I learn will come from Twitter. I keep kind of half an eye on like the HackerOne activity feed as well to see like what people are coming up with. I don't really end up going to conferences and things that much unless I'm speaking, which I always feel a little bit selfish about, but usually I'll wait for the videos on YouTube afterwards, and I can watch those. Like I didn't go to DEF CON this year. I've watched a whole bunch of the talks as they've appeared on YouTube. What else? Just talking to people as well. Like ask them, you know, what they're working on, or if they found anything cool recently, or whatever, and just sometimes just general, you know, everyday conversation, like, hey, how are you doing? What you've been, you know, what you've been doing this weekend, or whatever. Sometimes like stuff comes out of that that's really interesting, and I'll just, you know, get the bug and run with it, and then, you know, 20 tabs open researching stuff before you know it. Are there any other ways? Like I think that's definitely the main things for me. Also like newsletters as well. So HackerOne have Zero Daily, Integrity have the Bug Bites, which is actually really good. There's a lot of content. Like I mean, Zero Daily is great, but it's quite short. If you're after like something a bit meatier, the Bug Bites, is that what they call it? Bug Bites? Yeah.
I don't know. I've never, yeah.
Okay. There's usually like at least 50 links in that newsletter when it comes out. So I keep an eye on that sort of stuff too. There's a few other things I kind of always mean to do. So I think Paged Out, I want to say, is like an e-zine thing that launched recently with like one-pager tech stuff in it. That's like sometimes quite niche or niche, depending on your opinion. But yeah, I think that about sums it up for me.
Yeah. It occurred to me, nobody's kicking me out of my room, so I'm going to take advantage of that.
Awesome.
The tool development and like the command line and all of that kind of stuff. I assume a lot of that comes from the job. But if you're developing a new tool, is it like you don't know something, you dig into that, you learn it, or like you're doing something kind of repetitively and it's like, oh, I should just develop a tool for this? Is that learning process kind of like continuous in that type of cycle as well? Like, is that how that rolls out for you? Or are you just largely relying on kind of like your knowledge base as an engineer for the last, you know, I'm going to say like 10 years or something?
Yeah, it's about more than 10 years now, I think. I think it's quite hard to draw the line because you're sort of, I don't know if other people have this problem too, but as soon as I've learned something, I kind of feel like it should, you know, it's just common knowledge. I don't ever expect people to know that stuff, but like a real common feeling for me, like when I do a talk, is, oh God, people are going to be so bored because I'm not telling them anything they don't know, right? And then afterwards, I talk to people and they go, oh, I never knew this. I'm like, I have to kind of remind myself that the knowledge I've accumulated over the last decade is not common knowledge and can be useful to people. Sometimes I'm really surprised by like what I consider to be just a real minor thing or a technique or a tiny piece of information. People are like, wow, that's, you know, that's incredible. Like the video with stock, the whole piping things in and out of Vim buffers thing. People have been completely blown away by that. And I've been doing it for years, you know.
Yeah, I was blown away by it. Yeah, I use Vim quite a bit and did not know that.
Yeah. And like, you know, everyone's got their own subset of Vim, and that one happens to be mine. But in terms of like learning things when I'm making tools, it is usually like I have an idea, like, oh, I think there might be a bug in this sort of situation, or I need to find this piece of information, or wouldn't it be cool if I could just go and fetch all of these things real easily? And in trying to solve those problems, I usually go, oh, this bit's hard. I can give you an example of something that I built recently in that sort of a way. So I was looking at building a word list for something. I was like running burp intruder against something. I was like, oh, I need a word list based on like a bunch of JavaScript files. And I realized it was actually kind of hard to just pull out all of the words from these JavaScript files. Like I thought of a couple of different ways to do it. Like I could put on a space, but that doesn't really work. And I could use grep with particular regular expression, and like all of the solutions I came up with were a little bit clunky. So I just hacked together a little tool that I called TOK, T-O-K, in my Pax repo, somewhat predictably. And all it does is it takes text on standard input and it outputs all of the words, I guess you could say. So I think it defaults to alphanumeric only, just like one per line. And you can also add additional characters that it considers to be word characters, like dashes or underscores or whatever. And the TOK's short for tokenize. And using that, I can turn any file into a word list, like just by piping it into a command, and then like sort -u to like remove duplicates or something like that. And you know, there's going to be a lot of cruft in there, but if you're running a few thousand requests through Intruder, like they don't really matter. So like I think a lot of my tools come out of that thing of I'm finding something hard and I want to make my own life easier. Like my most popular tool is not a security tool. It's one called Gron, which turns JSON files into like a series of JavaScript assignments. And I wrote that like 10 years ago in PHP, or maybe it was 8 years ago, I forget, because I was trying to find a value in like a 1 megabyte JSON file. And when I found it, it was like 9 levels deep. I was like, I'm going to have to scroll for an hour to figure out like what the path to this value is, right? So like, I can write something that tells me the whole path to every value. And I started writing that, and at some point was like, what format should I use? And was like, oh, I'll make it just valid JavaScript to make sense. And that kind of turned into this Gron tool. And you know, that's all it was. It was something to make my life easier. And other people seemed to like it too. And it kind of spiraled from there, and I rewrote it in Go and all that kind of thing. And I learned a ton writing that tool, because that was one place I had I'm not sure it was scope creep, but I added more features than I was expecting. And at some point I ended up writing a parser so that it could do the reverse operation as well. And I kind of learned a bunch about parsers and EBNF, which is, I'm going to pronounce this wrong, extended Bacchus Nor form, which is kind of like the stuff you see in RFCs, where it's describing like a language syntax or something, or protocol. So I learned about that and like defined the grammar for it and wrote the parser and all that kind of thing. So I learned loads doing that. That, you know, came in useful later on when Edo at Flow was working on its security.txt thing. I wrote the initial ABNF for the RFC, because like who knows ABNF outside of like computer scientists, right? But like I did because I needed it to write this thing that was just a tool to make my life easier.
Wow, that's crazy. But also, yeah, it's kind of refreshing to hear, because like looking at like somebody's repo like you, it's just kind of like, oh, like the code, and even you talking about like the experience with Arnie, it's like, oh, the code probably just flows out of the fingers, right? And so it's cool to hear like 75% of it is kind of like what you know, what you have, and then the other 25, I'm making these percentages up. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but it's like going to learn, right? And improving that, and then iterating on that learning so that you get to 100, and then the next time that 75% is a broader 75%, and that new 25% that you go after.
So you can see, actually, another shameless plug on my part, but you can see a really good contrast in this in a video I put out yesterday. I did a stream, and the premise was that I was going to code a tool live with no prep whatsoever in response to people's suggestions. And that ended up being modifying two tools, I guess, adding a new source to my asset finder tool, which is in Go, and then modifying a thing I'd written in JavaScript to use Puppeteer for checking for open redirects, which was really hacked together. And there's a really great contrast there because I'm an okay-ish Go programmer, but I'm not a very good JavaScript programmer, especially when it comes to modern JavaScript. So in that video, you can see it's like an hour long, and the first 10 minutes is me doing some Go, and it's all quite smooth and it works quite well, and it's quite quick. And then the remaining like 50 minutes, 3/4 of an hour of that video is me struggling with modern JavaScript and like looking things up in documentation and getting errors and more errors and tying myself in knots and eventually arriving at a solution that works but is not really that elegant. So like that, I think, would be a pretty good example of the contrast of where how I work when I know something well and how I work when I don't know something very well.
So on that note, so where would we find that video and then some of the conference videos that you talked about? Is just searching your name enough to find them on YouTube?
Yeah, I'm fairly easy to search, but if you head to, I think, tomhudson.co.uk, I've got my talks linked as YouTube videos down the bottom, as well as a bunch of tools. It's kind of my like online CV-ish or resume sort of site. My other videos are on YouTube and are not linked. I'm trying to remember my YouTube username. It's I think Tom Nom Nom was taken. I always get mixed up with which one is it. Oh, okay, so really confusingly, my username on YouTube is tomnomnom.com, but the dot is spelled out D-O-T, so it's like all one word. Or find me Tom Nom Nom on Twitter, and like I tweeted the video link the other day. So those are that.
Sweet. Final question, Tom, if you don't mind, if you still have time.
Of course.
This is a selfish question because it's I've recognized that I want to improve my source code analysis, like actually doing like the white box analysis. And you've talked about you doing that when you started out in bug bounties. And so, do you have resources or recommendations on ways to improve that, or is your experience purely that based on experience and looking at different code and whatnot?
So like the annoying answer there is practice, which is, that's true for everything.
I get it internally when I talk to the other people in the security team. Yeah. It's like, how did you get there? It's like, I just practice. It's like,
yeah, I've just been doing it for 10 years. That's how I did it. Like I read a lot of code and try and understand, what it does. And I'll sometimes try and read code in languages I don't know either, which is especially good practice because you kind of learn relatively quickly like which bits you need to really pay attention to and which bits you don't. I do find it hard to do like source code analysis for hunting for bugs in languages I don't know well. So like I was taking a look at a C++ project the other day, don't know C++. Wow, it looks complicated. And like ditto for Rust, but like with PHP, I've been writing PHP for a long time, and I've written a lot of really insecure PHP in my time before I really knew what I was doing. And as a result, I kind of like I know what to look for to an extent. So I put time into figuring out which things I should look out for in PHP projects, for example. And I've kind of added little bits to my tooling to help me with that. So I have another tool, surprise, surprise, called GF, which I've mentioned a few times in other places, which is really just a place to store the grep patterns that I use all the time. I have patterns for PHP sources, so like all the super globals, like post and get variables and cookies and things. And one for like execution syncs, like shell exec or fopen, fileget contents, that kind of thing. And they're kind of the places I'll latch onto when I'm like just starting to look at a project. But the main thing I do is just try and understand how the application works. Like I'll try and be a human debugger, get the program running like on a local environment, and like Docker is great for that. So I think somewhere I have like some scripts to like spin up a WordPress instance in a Docker container, because I've occasionally looked at like WordPress extensions and I need a WordPress instance. But generally I'll just try and find the entry point, like where does the program start from the user's perspective, and just try and trace it through. And it's a long, laborious process. But the other way I sometimes go at it is I'll find part of an application when it's running and go like, where's the code for this? And I'll like try and find it. And I kind of do this, what I've called grep-driven development, like find a unique-ish looking string on the page, grep for that, look at the code where that is, see if you think that's the place that you're looking for. Change the code slightly, make sure the application either changes or breaks to sort of verify you're in the right place. And really just go at it from that perspective. Trying to understand what the code does is like the first part. And every language is different with that in terms of what tools are available. So JavaScript, client-side JavaScript especially, we're actually in a really good shape because everyone running Chrome has a actually pretty great debugger, like just a keyboard shortcut away. So I would say JavaScript is a really good place to start because those tools are everywhere and prevalent, and they're well understood. They're not complex to set up at all. Like if you want to set up a PHP debugger or something like that, you've got your work cut out for you. But you've got a great JavaScript debugger right there. And you can read up on stuff that's in DevTools, like setting breakpoints, and conditional breakpoints can be very useful too, and use that to sort of jump to definitions of things and then set more breakpoints and tweak the code a little bit to kind of make it do what you want. And you can also do this really great thing where you set a breakpoint and the code pauses, and you can just run whatever code you want in the console. So it's like, I want to know what would happen if I change the value of this variable somehow. Like, does that result in a bug? And you can just do it, which is great because you can save a lot of time that way. I always used to approach a lot of those things where I'd start looking for the sources, like, it's reading from document.location.hash or something, and try and follow it to a bug. But actually, you can jump to the end and go, like, if I managed to get my user supplied value to here, would it even result in an issue? And I can kind of shortcut that process that way.
That's great. That's a huge nugget of info. I'd never thought about that. Because I've used the debugger, and I'm still not necessarily proficient or not in love with it in Chrome. I mean, specifically the JS Chrome debugger. But I never thought about like flipping back and forth with the I've used console maybe like once in that process, but I'm always like using the drop down and trying to like find things in the navigation on the right in terms of like what's been said, or like hovering over the variable to see it. But actually flipping back and forth and like manipulating things live, I don't think I fully appreciated that, or even kind of like setting that breakpoint, getting there, and then seeing like if this is my value, like what's going to end up happening. That's wild.
Yeah, I might be doing a stream on that soon, actually, specifically on like hunting for DOM XSS. So
definitely, I would love that. Tom, I mean, we're at an hour and 20 minutes here, or just about. So I mean, I could probably talk to you for another hour or so. I've got a laundry list of questions, let alone some of the things that have popped into my mind with us talking. But it's probably best to cut it there. On behalf of everyone that's kind of like watching and is going to be learning from you, really appreciate it. Thank you very much for your time, and thank you very much for going into like the break on hacking. I don't think that topic's ever discussed enough, nor is it ever discussed as transparently as you did today. So thank you very much. Really appreciate it. And looking forward to seeing you again soon.
See you soon, Pete. Bye.
Yep.